Hi, my name's Dr. James Bylund. I'm a clinical and educational psychologist. I'm also the owner and co-director of the Bylund Clinic.
And hi, my name is Danielle Morales. I'm a licensed educational psychologist and the co-director of the Bylund Clinic. And we're here today to talk about a really important topic. It has a lot of layers, so we're going to be breaking down our discussion into a couple of different parts. So today, for episode one, the first part of our discussion, we are going to be zooming in on screen use. So, how recreational screen use works neurologically, why kids are driven to use it excessively, and what the real world impacts are of this type of relationship with technology. So, James, if you can kick us off this morning, what personally got you interested in this topic?
Yeah, thanks, Danielle. I've got a 13-year-old and an 8-year-old. My 13-year-old was born in 2011, the year the iPad came out. As brand new parents, my wife and I did what I think probably nearly every other parent of our generation did, which was run out to Babies R Us and get all of the different toys that we thought were going to help stimulate our child's development. And around that time, that included a lot of touch screen baby and toddler devices. It included, applications on our phones and iPad that we all thought were supporting our child's development. My father was a retired superintendent and bought my son some baby Einstein iPad, right, which we thought was going to be wonderful for him. It turned out a few years later, when he was in preschool and kindergarten, that he was having real difficulty with his attention, with behavioral regulations, temper tantrums, outbursts, was having some social difficulties. And I really started to wonder, like, gosh, is there something more serious, going on with our child? And then my wife, one day when I came home from work, said, James, I think it's the screens, right? And I thought to myself, well, I mean, maybe, but it was foreign to me, this idea that, okay, these screen devices could be causing all these problems with my child. But I thought, okay, let's give it a try. And we shut down all devices. Like there was no TV on in the background of our house. Like every device was like just like off limits. There was no movie on the ride to grandma's house in the car. There was no Yo Gabba Gabba. Like it was all this shut off. And in about 3 weeks, we saw this remarkable change in our child. Like not that he never had a tantrum, right? But the intensity of them, how long they lasted, how easy it was to sort of transition them, all got much, much better. Social skills started to improve. Was having a hard time with friendships and kind of getting picked on the playground, and now it was starting to develop friendships. I mean, it's a really dramatic difference, which has sort of led me to kind of investigate, like, is this a real thing? Like, did we sort of stumble upon, something here in our personal lives that is, has broader application? And sure enough, just sort of researching the topic out of my own personal interest, found growing literature on it. And in fact, what we were seeing with our child is what a lot of families were seeing with their children. And the response that we saw to removing the screen devices is what a lot of other families were seeing when they removed the screen devices. So, I'm not anti-screen. He watches movies. He he texts his friends now. Like everything in school is on the computer, right? So it's not like he's never been in front of a screen device, and including recreational screen activities. But we have learned to sort of calibrate that a bit to a degree at which we feel he can appropriately monitor it. But that was on a personal level, and then I thought to myself, gosh, if this is affecting other people, is this something that we should be taking a look at in our clinic? Which is when we started sort of like kind of screening for it in our health and developmental history form, to say, like, how, are there signs of screen dependence in the kids that are coming into our clinic? And sure enough, I mean, I would say a significant number of kids that come through our clinic to get evaluated for some neurodevelopmental disability like autism, ADHD, learning disability, or some type of mental health condition. A lot of them are experiencing some degree of sort of clinically what would be considered screen dependent. So then it sort of raised my eyebrows in terms of kind of the professional applications and how we're using this information to support kids and families.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I think it's a great point too, that especially for the previous generation, um, this type of screen relationship is really an experiment, right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the kids were on the front lines. They were the guinea pigs that were the recipients of all of this startling new type of interactive technology
Yeah.
that we know neurologically is super different than a passive recreational experience like watching TV, right? It's much more
Yeah.
powerful, it's much more addictive. So the game changed a lot on parents and kids. And we are now at a point where these conversations are more normalized, but I do think it's really important to have that grounding and have that framing of how far things have come to get us to this point that we're aware of these problems.
No,
Um,
100%.
mhm. And so, can you talk through neurologically how screens are doing this? So, how are screens causing this level of dependence in kids and teens?
Yeah, so it's a really complicated topic, you know. And screen devices and activities are just fundamentally, like you said, different than when I was a kid. Super Mario Brothers, the graphics, and the speed at which the screen, the clips between screens, it was much slower. The visual and sort of auditory input was much less intense. And frankly, you died 3 times and the game is over. That's much different than sort of these massive multiplayer role player games that kids are playing online now that are going on continuously, even when they log off. Like they can't log off because they can, they're getting attacked when they're not playing. So just it's fundamentally different. I mean, there wasn't anything, like social media, when we were growing up. So the landscape's just entirely different. And so it's not really comparable to say like comparing today's video games. Oh, I used to play video games when I was younger, right? We are talking about an entirely different beast, right? But the fact is the devices are designed intentionally to be highly addictive, right? That's how they monetize it, right? It is the more time you're spending on it, the more data they're gathering from you, the more they're making, the more they're selling, and so forth. So they want you coming back to it frequently, and they want you staying on the device longer, right? And so they've spent billions of dollars researching this, hundreds of billions of dollars researching this in order to make this as absolutely addictive as possible. And part of that neurologically is the sort of neurochemical dopamine, right? Now, a lot of people think about dopamine like a reward neurochemical, right? Like it rewards behavior and therefore makes you want to do things more and more and more. And there's some truth to that. It is released in response to receiving a reward. But dopamine is really much more about desire. It's about sort of initiating an action in pursuit of a reward, right? And frankly, people can be addicted to things that they can't stand, that they hate, right? Like, people who are, drug dependent might hate their addiction, right? But they're compelled to keep pursuing it because of the power of dopamine. Now, talking about the hundreds of millions of dollars invested in terms of making these devices as absolutely addictive as possible, that they're basically trying to make it as dopaminergic as possible, right? They want to get you they want you to seek out and pursue the device or the game or the application, right? And there's sort of behavioral ways that they do that. There was this book published a long time ago, Addiction by Design, and spent 15 years studying, Las Vegas casinos, specifically slot machines, right? To see like how are slot machines so darn addictive, and there's a number of reasons for it. Two big ones are, this idea of variable reward, right? And what they call like kind of like near wins, right? And what they found, what was most addictive about slot machines wasn't actually winning, right? It was the pursuit of the win, right? So this idea of variable reward, right? You never knew when you were going to get rewarded the most, right? You never knew when you were going to hit a jackpot. If you knew it was every third time, that was much less addictive than if you never knew when it was going to come, but at some point it was going to come, right? So actually losing was more addictive than winning because what you thought was maybe it was the next pull that was going to be more addictive, right? And related to that was this idea of near wins, right? So I'm not a gambler, right? But like you imagine like the old school slot machine, you pull the lever and it's cherry, cherry, 3 or something, right? Like, oh, if I just got one more cherry, I would have hit the jackpot and won this huge reward, right? And so it was this idea of like getting close but not quite there, that was incredibly addictive, right? It's the same thing when you do scratchers, right? And you scratch off and you're like, oh, I need 3 bells to win, but I scratch off 2 bells. Well, you weren't any closer to winning than if you didn't scratch off any bells. You lost all of your money, but psychologically you felt like you were going to win, which sort of created this dopaminergic response, like, okay, I'm in pursuit of this. I just need to try again and try again and try again in order to be able to get the reward, right? So sort of kind of this cross section between sort of behavioral psychology, and what we are uncovering and learning about the brain in terms of why this is so addictive. The problem though is we also develop then a tolerance, right? And which is why people who abuse substances need more and more of that substance in order to be able to get the same effect. Well, the same thing is then true for video games and social media. We need to spend more and more time scrolling social media, or we need to spend have a bigger screen and more intensive graphics. We need a gaming chair. We need headphones, like all these things to make the experience of gaming more intense in order to get the same satisfaction, that we got out of it before.
Or I think for teenagers in particular on social media, more and more attention too, right? So if you get habituated to a certain level of engagement and then you drop below that, that could be a very negative experience. Why didn't this get 30 or 40 likes, whatever
Exactly.
that kind of is?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
something exceeds that, then you feel, wow, that was a great post. I also think with the variable reinforcement, you know, there's so many levers going on behind the scenes of how things are reinforced. Some of it very intentional by design, and also some very algorithmic, which is, I guess, various levels of intention to be argued. With the platform kind of running itself to increase engagement. But if you think about it through the lens, especially of a young person, again, that's so socially motivated by social attention, or so motivated by social attention, and you have a post and it does really well, and then you try to craft a very similar post the next day and it doesn't do well,
Yeah,
that kind of variability of why did this do well and not do well, and it just drives more compulsive use to try to tweak and ever
yeah,
refine to get that increasing level of engagement.
yeah. That's a great example of it. And then we're going to talk about some of sort of the sort of intersection between sort of the neurological effects, the behavioral psychology components, and it's sort of like human psychological needs, right? And they definitely all those things sort of intersect. And you provide some really great examples in terms of that that idea of near wins or variable reward in social media. And on the flip side, I mean, the same thing is built into the video games that that kids are playing in terms of every time you pass a level, there's a next level, right? Like there's no end to the game, right? So like this pursuit of like, oh, you'll hear kids saying, oh, let me just finish this next level. Let me just finish this next level in the video game, because this idea of like, oh, I won, but I didn't quite win, right? And so I need to keep going further, or in terms of the variable rewards. I mean, sometimes you execute a move and it reaches a successful outcome. Sometimes you execute that same exact move seemingly at the exact same time and it really results in a different outcome, right? But all of these sort of behavioral reinforcement tools are built into the video games, and built into social media. I mean even the idea of like on social media that there's an endless scroll, right? I've never been a big social media user. My understanding is there was a point at which, on Facebook, you scrolled and then you reached the end and then you'd have to click next to go onto the next page. Well, they realized it's a lot more addictive if you don't have to pause for a moment to hit next, because you just keep scrolling, because you never know if that next scroll is going to be the one that really, you see the post that really engages you, and that's that idea of like, that near win. I'm almost there. I'm almost there. I'm almost there, but you're never there.
Well, it's the same for video games. Video
Yeah.
games used to end. Yeah, I'm in my mid 30s. We had games, right, that you put in
Yeah.
a console.
Yeah.
And now a lot of games are subscription based. And so they are always pushing updates to kind of the map. There's new
Oh,
tools
yeah.
and things to see. And there's also, I know, games that even do have a discrete end. You can play different ways to get different outcomes. So, like you said, all of this, like, refinement of behavioral and psychological science in the name of making the platforms more addictive. And I think
Yeah.
we really are at a point where we're really good at getting people addicted to these
Yeah.
these.
Really good. Yeah. I
Mhm.
remember one time, my brother-in-law, who got really into some game on his phone, like Clash of Clans or something. I don't know what it was. Like, so, so where he would just thought this was, amazing. And unfortunately for him, like really got sucked into it, and I remember one time being at a family event where he got my password, I don't know, for my son or my wife or somebody, and he downloaded the game on there because he was so convinced that I was gonna like absolutely love this thing. And I was like, okay, whatever, dude, And then like I got alerted in the middle of the night that like someone was burning my village down. I was like, I mean, like literally the game is going on while I'm not even playing this game. So I mean, I deleted it because I've got, just far too many things to be doing than playing, Clash of Clans. But I mean, it just like it amazed me, like, oh my God, like no wonder. Like if I'm getting alerted at 3 o'clock in the morning to protect my village, it's
Mhm.
like, oh my God, like this game doesn't turn off.
Yeah, yeah, and you're an adult and you have
Yeah.
the boundaries, right?
Right.
Psychologically, and now again reframing the discussion around youth. They don't have those same self-control mechanisms. And again, there's the social component. If you see that your friends are up in the middle of the night playing the game and you're getting
Oh, for sure.
notification that it can pull you back in. Yeah, I
For
mean, I
sure.
think that's a solid framing of, kind of the basics of the behavioral design that facilitates addiction. Are there any pieces that you want to unpack more about the neurochemistry or the psychological components like need for belonging?
Yeah, I think that's another important component of it, and it definitely like intersects with everything that we've been talking about so far. But there, beyond like when Sean Parker, who is the founder of Facebook, who talked about these devices are addictive because they're designed to be addictive. He talked about sort of tapping into vulnerabilities in human psychology, right? Now, I think you could have easily said, sort of extracted from that, like, vulnerabilities in human neuropsychology, right? Or neurophysiology, right? Because of the, we can see, the changes in the brain that are occurring in response to these, sort of neuropsychological, neurobehavioral strategies. But he spoke specifically to tapping into vulnerabilities in human psychology. And there's certain things that are by design, right, sort of built into our human psychology, because for tens of thousands of years they've really supported they've really supported our development. One of those is to be part of a group, or historically thinking like part of a tribe, right? Like, really sort of essential to human survival. It's why when people feel a sense of isolation, not this sort of like personal solitude where I can I can be on my own and feel just fine. But when people feel sense of isolation or rejection, right, it registers in the body as physical pain, because as human beings, in order to survive, we need to be part of a group, because historically, if you weren't, good luck surviving in the wild, if you weren't part of a human clan, right? So tech companies are able to tap into that, right? And we've talked about some of these elements, right, around social media, and the size of your following on social media, right, is sort of tapping into the sense of being part of a group. How many people are liking my post? Am I liked by other people? Is tapping into that as well. And for a lot of these kids too, these boys who are gaming, and a lot of their quote unquote social relationships are online relationships with other people. It's because they're playing these massive multiplayer role-playing games where they are part of a group of other people, and they are able to engage and interact in ways that for some of them is less accessible in the real world. But they're definitely tapping into these components. And I made the joke, around the sort of, I don't know if it was Clash of Clans, if I got that wrong, I apologize, but it was some game. But about it continuing to go on. And you said again, well, and then if your friends are playing, right? And now your friends are depending on you, to not only be able to, play the game for your own success, but for their success, right? So the way these things are designed is really, intended to tap into that need to be accepted, that need to be part of a group. Unfortunately, there's some real consequences to that, because we find that the more time kids are engaged in these activities, or the larger their social following on social media, that the lonelier they actually feel, which is really kind of something important at some point to kind of dive into. But they definitely tap into that psychological need to be part of a group. There's other things like, as human beings, we're designed to pursue goals, right? Historically, as human beings, we would need to pursue food, pursue shelter, in order to be able to survive. These days it's a little bit different, right? We might pursue a career, or we might pursue income, or we might pursue, achievement in school or sports or other things. But it's an important part of what it is to be human. And again, the social media and tech companies, gaming companies are able to tap into that. And we've talked about the pursuit of likes, right? The pursuit of a larger following online, the pursuit of passing the next level in the video game. But again, it's a pursuit that's never met, right? So if 10,000 years ago and I'm hungry and I'm pursuing food, I kill a it sounds ridiculous here, but I wasn't around 10,000 years ago, but maybe I kill a wildebeest, right? And then I eat, and then I feel a sense of satisfaction. But the social media and video games never produce that sense of satisfaction. It only produces a sense of more craving, right? So, oh, I got X number of likes on this one. I want to post again to get more likes, right? I passed that level. Now I need to pass the next level, right? But there's never that sense of like deep satisfaction that comes with achieving the goal. It's just an endless hunt, which again keeps us, increasingly engaged. And then sort of the last thing I would add to that too is sort of this human need for kind of controlling our environment, right? As a species, we've done a remarkable ability. We've demonstrated a remarkable ability to do that in the world, right? To be able to, we don't need to, survive brutal heat or freezing cold weather, because we're able to control the temperature in the room that we're sitting in, right? So, I mean, it's really pretty, remarkable. But online, what that starts to show up like is, well, if I'm, having a hard time socially, I'm feeling sort of rejected by my peers, I can kind of create this online avatar, in this video game, and I can control it to be whatever it is that I desire to be, right? On social media, I can control my online profile in ways that I can't, control my real life, right? So, I can control, what gets posted and what doesn't get posted. How I, alter the pictures that I am posting online in order to present myself in sort of the most, desirable way possible. But as we've seen, I think people readily recognize, right, the mental health effects that can have, if there's this disconnect between who we're trying to present ourselves online and who we believe we are inside, right? And now we're also then comparing ourselves because of that need to be part of a group. We're constantly comparing ourselves to everybody else online, because we want to be accepted members of the group. And so we're comparing ourselves of our value compared to everybody else online, who of course is also presenting a manicured lifestyle. And at some base level, we understand that, and yet sort of psychologically, it hits us a little bit. It hits us a little bit different. So again, these companies, they understand sort of the behavioral psychology of addiction. They understand the neurochemistry of addiction, and they understand these sort of deep-rooted human psychological needs, these vulnerabilities that on one hand lead us to great successes, but also leave us vulnerable to addiction and some of the trappings of social media and online gaming.
Mhm. Excuse me. Yeah, it's remarkable, isn't it? Because there's so many layers to it. And nowadays, I feel like these are conversations where most people have some degree of awareness about
Yeah.
at least some of these intersecting layers. But again, it's remarkable to think about how much research has actually been amassed, both from independent authors curious about the adverse psychological impacts, at universities and whatnot, and the tech companies themselves to exploit these vulnerabilities. So it is
Yeah.
remarkable. I mean, I think the other piece that's important in the context of this conversation is that all of these things don't happen in a social vacuum either, right? And so I think one of the major pressures as a parent is, that this is kind of the norm of how social interactions are evolving. So,
Yeah.
my son is 3, so thankfully we're not at this level yet, but it's coming down the tracks. What I hear a lot from clients of, teens like yourself also is, well, I really struggle to meter out things like online gaming
Yeah.
because that's where his or her peers are. And so if I remove that, they are not going to be interacting with their friends anymore because,
Yeah.
kind of the whole norm has shifted around, co-playing or online co-gaming. I don't know if that's
Yeah,
the term,
sure.
with other people online, right? That's how kids are hanging out. And I've seen other research from academics also talking about the rise of just cultural shifts and the move away from free range parenting, to more intensive parenting styles. So all of these things are kind of layering, right? So it's a lot easier to fit in 2 hours of gaming with your friends, on an online format and kind of check those boxes for that psychological belonging and getting very much needed social interaction between swim practice and homework and bedtime, as opposed to living in a culture that was a little bit more forgiving in terms of closer knit communities and being able to let your kids outside and play. And so it's tricky, right? Because I think even parents that have a deep understanding of these vulnerabilities and how they're exploited, the practical implications of, okay, what do I do with that, can feel very disempowering.
Yeah. No, it's a good, a really important point. And I know, in a future podcast here too, we're going to really sort of dive into what can this practically look like at home.
Mhm.
But two things kind of come up for me in sort of take that in, right? Um, you know, One of them is like, to be clear, personally and professionally, like, I'm not anti-recreational screen, right? So it can be very easy to hear everything I just said and be like, oh, my kid can never be in front of a screen device. Like, if they play a video game one time or they ever have a social media account, then this sort of doomsday outcome is like guaranteed. Like, I'm not saying that at all. And in fact, yeah, I'm not anti-screen. And what I said sort of earlier about my own son's kind of journey with this, some people are more susceptible to the effects of screens than others. I think my oldest son was a little bit more susceptible to that, certainly than my younger son was more susceptible to it than his best friend who lived across the street. Like who could spend much more time, on this. I remember seeing him when the Switch first came out, and he's like leaving his house, like, continuing to play the game that he was playing on the screen on the TV, is now going to his mom's car, playing the same game. That was and he seemed to have really little adverse consequence of it, at least at that point, right? So to be clear, everybody's vulnerability to it, I think, it differs. But I'm also not like anti-screen, right? Like I think what we're talking about here is how to create like a healthy balance with other activities, right? So that there is time when I can text my friends, there is time when I can go on YouTube, there is time when at a certain age, I am a little leery of social media until a certain age. We've seen, really how terribly harmful it can be for young girls too, in particular, if when they have access to that at too young of an age. But I'm certainly not saying like no recreational screen activities. But how do you find that balance with all those other things that we need to do to be healthy and thriving people? What then comes up for me too is sort of the socioeconomic disparities, right? Because it used to be that, like, oh, there's the tech disparity was between people who were had the means to own a computer, and have internet access, versus like an internet desert in some communities where families didn't have computers and didn't have access to the internet. Now, for the most part, in the United States, everybody has access to an internet connected device. Now the disparity is really between the kids that have access to other activities beyond the school day and kids who are just at home, whose parents are working, who have nothing to do because they can't leave their house other than be tethered to their device. And I think that kind of creates a whole other disparity, because you're right. I mean, as a parent, in order to facilitate, our kids aren't just running down the street, knocking on Jimmy's door and going for a bike ride, or running down to the park and goofing off, right? I mean, like, that's not how, parenting looks in most households these days. Part of me thinks that we probably would benefit from getting back to that. I think the fears that, myself included, of parents our age have about, the dangers of, our kids having more freedom outdoors are not supported in terms of like crime rates and things like that. But at any rate, it's sort of the reality of things. So our kids then need to be involved in very structured activities. We take them to music lessons, we take them to swim practice, we take them to baseball practice. And here's where they get outdoors, they engage socially with their peers, they develop skills other than gaming and scrolling social media, right? But again, those it's can be a bit daunting and not as accessible to all families, right? When both parents are working, or they might not have the time or the means to be able to provide those opportunities for their kids, because that's just not a reality for all families.
No, I love that you elevated the socioeconomic component. And I have thoughts on it, but I think it's a good segue into, I know one of the other things we wanted to talk about today, around, the real world adverse impacts. But you're right, right? If you have a kid in a situation where parents are working all the time, or it's just not safe, right? Like, I've worked in communities and with families where it's not safe to go outside because they, are very crime burdened communities. And so the kids do need to stay outside when they don't have adult supervision, because there's a lot of community shootings or whatnot. And so, it's a whole other topic to unpack, but it makes me also think about, the disparity, that kids have in terms of enrichment on breaks, and, lack of extended school year, and, all these other things. But, tech has just become this really intensive overlay, because it does impact beyond some of the things we've talked about with the socio emotional well-being, some of the attention and executive functioning pieces we'll get into later as well. So
Yeah.
it's a really complicated moral topic, as well as neurological and cultural topic. Again, we're going to have multiple discussions on this just because there are so many layers. But I think, one of the things we wanted to make sure we covered this morning was just, what are the adverse impacts of excessive screen use? And I like that you framed the difference between recreational screen use and excessive screen use, right?
Yeah.
And we'll subsequently kind of go on to unpack later on what are the difference between those two buckets. But what are some of the warning signs? I know you mentioned earlier in the conversation some of the things you were seeing with your own son, for example.
Yeah.
But what are some of the mental health, behavioral, or academic signs that parents should be on the lookout for, that maybe tech time is starting to adversely impact their kids' development?
Yeah, for sure. This is yeah, there's a lot here. So I appreciate sort of like the separating it, right? The sort of the behavioral effects, mental health effects, the academic, educational impact, because the impacts can be pretty wide ranging. I mean, and again, this kind of goes on a continuum from like mild to more severe, right? So I think on a mild level, I mean, certainly, kids having a hard time transitioning off of the screen device, right? Not wanting to participate in activities they used to participate in favor of the screen device, right? Having constantly asking to be on the screen device, right? I mean, there's certain things that I just think sort of more on kind of like on the milder end that probably all families experience to some degree, right? But what we've also seen on a more like significant end, right, is real serious implications for children's mental health, really severe behavioral problems, and really a significant impact on learning and school performance too. When recreational screen use has become a real problem, right? Behaviorally, a lot of these kids, are sort of kind of wired and tired, right? Like they're not getting enough sleep because they're up late gaming. They're not getting good quality restorative sleep because of the effects of the blue light from the device disrupts melatonin production and sleep quality. They're getting alerted during the night because they're by their friends on games or social media or so forth, right? So a lot of these kids are sort of like wired and tired, right? And I think all of us have been sort of in that state of not having sufficient sleep, and then on top of that, because of the recreational screen use, that their brains are all ramped up, right? Because of the bright unnatural colors, the rapid cycling of images on the screen, if they're for gaming in particular, right? Like the sort of auditory experience of online gaming. I mean, it can really sort of ramp up your nervous system, right? And so this combination of being kind of wired and tired can lead to a lot of problem behaviors, right? So the American Academy of Pediatrics and a host of other sort of medical organizations came out with a white paper a number of years ago that really said that there's a hands down causal relationship between excessive recreational screen use and aggression. Right now, that doesn't mean necessarily like severe aggression, but I mean it could be being more verbally and physically aggressive towards peers, being more verbally and physically aggressive towards parents or siblings. Right, is probably the most common. Slamming doors, throwing items, yelling, hitting, pushing, kicking, shoving. Right. So there seems to be a causal relationship between those things, right? On a mental health standpoint, and again, this is something that's gotten a lot more public attention, over the past few years. I know there was a sort of big uncovering of research within Facebook that looked at the relationship between social media use and young girls, levels of anxiety, depression, and eating disorders, right? And so I think this has gotten a lot more attention in terms of the impact on mental health. But there is, a correlation between, excessive recreational screen use and feelings of sadness and depression, feelings of isolation. I mentioned earlier, there seems to be the larger one social media following or friends group, the oftentimes more isolated and depressed and lonely an individual feels, right? There's this thing called the Dunbar effect, right? Which is basically like the number of people that we can have meaningful relationships with. And if you think of it as sort of like these sequential circles, right? That we're like our immediate family and close friends, right? And then it branches out to like kind of acquaintances and so forth. And then it kind of goes, there's this sort of like number of relationships at a certain quality that we can meaningfully have, right? So it's, 5 or 6 people within our family and close friend group. Then there's something like, 15 to 30 people kind of within our tribe, right? Of people that we have associations with, but aren't necessarily really close friends with. But there's a limit in terms of our human capacity to do that, right? And so the more and more quote unquote friends we have, the larger and larger our social network, the more diluted the quality of those relationships are, right? And so we have these people with, young people with these massive online followings, appear wildly popular online who feel very lonely and isolated at home, and so the effects on higher levels of depression, even and again, I'm not trying to sound like too like doomsday here, right? I mean, this isn't like, oh, my kid plays video games, this horrible thing is going to happen to them. I'm not saying that, right? But there is sort of a correlation between higher levels of suicidal ideation, for example, because of the higher levels of feelings of isolation, worthlessness, and so forth that goes along with it. We see higher levels of anxiety amongst young people the more time that they're spending online gaming, or on social media. Higher levels of social anxiety. Young people, they get much more accustomed to and comfortable interacting with people online, but really struggle to do that in sort of real world face-to-face interaction. So we're really seeing some pretty significant impact on young people's mental health. I mentioned the young girls and eating disorders. I mean, one of the things that social media does in order to drive engagement is constantly driving people towards more and more extreme content. Because whatever it was that they clicked on or spent more time looking at before, they may have satisfied that need. And so now we have to present them with something a little bit more extreme, in order to capture their engagement again. And that can really be a slippery slope in terms of the content that we're feeding our children, online. And we're also seeing effects on learning and school performance. There's since at least the late 90s, early 2000s, that there's been, the American Academy of Pediatrics has published studies, on the effects of recreational screen use and inattention and hyperactivity and impulsivity, and the correlation between the amount of time kids are spending on recreational screen devices and the likelihood of being diagnosed with ADHD a couple of years later. A lot of the early studies in the early 2000s were looking at SpongeBob SquarePants because how quickly the screens cycled, just how rapid it switched from one scene to the next versus something that Sesame Street or something like that was developed in the 1970s specifically with the intention of supporting children's development, right? Not supporting higher levels of engagement, but supporting child development, right? Like it approached that program in a much different way than most programs are designed today, right? And that was in the early 2000s with SpongeBob SquarePants. They've replicated similar studies in more recent years, and again seen the effects on the likelihood of a child being diagnosed with ADHD correlates with the amount of time that they're engaged in recreational screen devices when they're younger. We've seen it with interesting studies around like reading comprehension. That when kids now again, to be clear, to like there, and you mentioned this earlier, Danielle, but like this difference between like addictive recreational screen activities that promote dependence and other screen activities, right? We'll sometimes joke, I've never had a kid come into our office like addicted to writing a term paper, right? Like it's really hard to get addicted to Excel spreadsheets, like it's just, they're not designed, in order to, in order to do that, but in this particular case, even reading off of a screen device, it seems like kids tend to scan for information rather than sort of like read more deeply, like the way you might read, like reading off of a paper book. And that reading comprehension actually goes down reading off of a screen versus reading out of a book. We just sort of mentally engage with it in a different way. But also interesting studies too, where like the kids would read a text and then take a 20-minute break, and one kid would relax during the 20 minutes, and then they test them on the comprehension, and another kid would play a video game, and the kid who played the video game forgot everything that they just read, right? Because then their hypothesis then was that like sort of our brain prioritized highly stimulating information over more sort of passive information, right? And so the information from the video game sort of crowded out what they had just read, and they couldn't retain that information anymore. So the effects on attention, the effects on reading comprehension and memory. And there's some interesting things I've read too, just around like teens, reasoning and problem solving skills, right? And this relationship between early imaginative play and later reasoning abilities, right? And so when the tech giants of today didn't grow up on social media and playing games online, right? Like the Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. I mean, they were creating things, right? They were imagining as young children and playing and building and constructing things. They weren't sort of passively following a series of steps outlined by the coder of the game, right? Like so video games don't promote creativity, right? They promote the ability to follow a sequence of steps in order to achieve a goal that was predetermined by the person who coded that game, right? Versus kids who are engaged in more imaginative play. And I remember, when I first got into this and we came back from a vacation, and I turned on the TV and there was like this commercial for a video game, and it was like some Disney game. I don't remember what the game was, but I remember very distinctly like one of the lines in the game was, "You can do anything you could imagine." And I remember my first my just impulsive reaction to that was like, yeah, except imagine, right? Like you're not actually engaging in imaginative play, And so when we're looking at our ability to regulate our attention, our ability to retain information, our ability to comprehend what we're reading, our ability to engage in imaginative play and later problem solving and reasoning versus just trying to get an answer. It seems to be affecting kids in school as well too. So whether it's children's behavior or mental health or their learning and school performance, again, excessive recreational screen use it has been shown to have pretty adverse consequences for kids and their development.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. A lot of layers. I think, what came up for me while you were talking about all that too is the decline in performance we've seen generally in academics, and it made the
Yeah.
wheels start turning. And I was thinking about the push for like electronic textbooks, for example, to save money, right? Like,
Yeah.
and how we know, as you're saying, that the brain isn't reading or processing information as deeply in an electronic format. Um, yeah, and as we had, began our conversation at the beginning, just kind of noting we've learned so much, in the past 10, 20, 15 years since these products have been launched, but how much more we still have to go, to
Yeah.
learn, and how much further we have to go. But it does make me think about, you see highly publicized decline in test scores, which is due to a myriad of factors, right, with the
Sure.
pandemic.
Right.
But you think about distance learning, what a debacle that had been for kids and families. And then as we talk about not processing information as deeply and what it means to have excessive screen time, and its impact on focus and self-regulation. Yeah, my thoughts were just going back to that.
Yeah.
But I think we're at a good ending place for today. Are there any closing comments? And then we can kind of queue up what we're going to cover next time.
Yeah, no, I mean, just to quickly piggyback what you said, I mean, the last year I was a school district director was when we were rolling out one-to-one devices for kids, and they were definitely sold to us from the tech companies as sort of being the future of education and how this was going to save education and improve engagement. And from my experience as a parent or as a psychologist who does a lot of assessments of kids in schools, it seems like the opposite has really been the case. And and I did talk about it in terms of like working memory, like our ability to multitask, and what and how that affects learning. And I see this at home with my son. I have to monitor him to make sure that he's actually on the tab he's supposed to be working on, because he could have 4, 5, 6 different things open that he's toggling back and forth between, which is what kids are doing in the classroom too. They're not attending to the teacher. They're not working on what they're supposed to be working on. They're completely distracted by these devices, and other things that they're searching and engaging with, and it's not learning. And I think we're probably going to see I would hope, a big movement in the direction away from, having the devices in the hands of every kid throughout the school day. It really has been pretty disruptive to kids learning.
I absolutely agree. I always like have a pit in my stomach when I walk into most public school settings and the ubiquitousness of the personal Chromebook.
Yeah.
I agree. Like, and we have the benefit of psychologists that we're going in to observe multiple different settings, so we can really see the quality of different programs. And but how many times we've been in a classroom and every kid is just has a Chromebook open, and you can see they're lost between the tabs, also watching YouTube,
Yeah.
and really engaging in surface level work
Yeah.
realistically, right? As opposed to receiving direct instruction or collaborative peer interaction. It's really been a detriment. I agree. And also in my experience in going to so many schools, a marker of how good the educational program is how quickly the Chromebooks come out, how often they're
Right.
out, and how long the kids are on them for. Even though
Yeah.
they're framed as a tool, they think they've really been a huge detraction from
Yeah.
concentration and learning and conceptual, understanding.
Yeah, I mean, just in some classes, how much class time is spent just getting all of the devices on and
Mhm.
connected and getting all the kids on the right tab. It just, even just from the waste of time, and I've heard teachers express that too, like how challenging it is to just get a lesson started when it's on the device.
Yeah. Yeah, like you said, hopefully, that's kind of the next frontier as we're looking more deeply as parents and educators and psychologists at really recognizing things like social media and excessive gaming, that has really become accepted, I think, universally, right? And hopefully, the next frontier is having a very critical conversation post pandemic, post Zoom learning
Yeah.
about the impact of personal devices, and Chromebooks in particular.
Yeah.
Um, and a whole other offshoot on AI
Yeah.
that,
Yeah. Whole other
that's
topic.
coming down the tracks. But I think that's a good stop point for today.
Yeah, I
So,
think so too.
and I know today we covered a lot of the adverse impacts and a little bit of the doom and gloom. But there's just so much, backstory, so much information to then queue up. How do we regulate, kids' screen use effectively and healthily and realistically, right? As
Yeah.
working parents, as most of us are. And then also, we also want to take time to discuss separately neurodivergence and screen use, because that's a whole other layer, right? Is the reciprocal relationship, or the bidirectional relationship between things like excessive screen use and autism, anxiety, ADHD, exacerbation of symptoms, as well as increased vulnerability to increased tech dependency, assessment, and all those other areas.
Yeah, for sure. No, thank you. I appreciate it. Like, actually, really looking forward to the next episode now.